In this lesson, we want to see how to create an ASM instance, and also once we have created the ASM instance, we also want to see how to create a database that uses ASM as its storage. So for us to create an ASM instance, the first thing that we need to do is that we need to download the Oracle Grid software from oracle.com, which we did in the introduction part of this series. Once you've downloaded Oracle Grid software, you need to extract it in your system, and once you've extracted it, then you will go ahead and perform the installation. But before you perform the installation, what you need is that you need to create 2 raw disks using UDEV, and then format them in a manner that your ASM instance can understand. So in this lesson, the first thing is that first we will create a partition where we are going to install the Oracle Grid software. Then number 2, we are going to create 2 other disks that we are going to mirror, and then we are going to put them in ASM disk group using the normal redundancy such that they'll be used for your ASM instance. Okay, so let's go ahead and create these additional disks in your VirtualBox server. Click on settings, then go to storage, and then under controller SATA, we want to add 3 disks as we have said. The first disk we are going to use to install Oracle Grid software. Then the other 2 disks we are going to add to our ASM disk group. So under controller SATA, let's create a new disk. So click on add new storage attachment, add disk, create new disk, then select the first option, VDI VirtualBox disk image, then dynamically allocated. So we are going to call this one Oracle Grid 1. That will be the name of the disk. Let's make it 10 GB, and then the location should be in the same location where we stored our root VG. So I'll go to my location, so I'm going to call it Oracle Grid 1. So you can store your disk in any location where you have space. Okay, then let me add another disk that I'm going to use for ASM storage. So I'm going to call this ASM V disk 1, again 10 GB, then the location is the same. Okay, create. Then lastly, I'll add another disk which will be the mirror of ASM disk 1. So this will be ASM V disk 2. So this will be the mirror of ASM disk 1. Then I also store it in the same location. Okay, so now I have my 3 disks. I have Oracle Grid 1, which I'm going to use to install my Oracle Grid software. I have ASM disk 1 and ASM disk 2, which I'm going to create as a mirror and then put that in my ASM disk group. So from there, I'm going to install the database in that ASM disk group. So just say OK and boot your machine. Once your machine are boot, log in as an Oracle user. Then make sure your network is working. Once you do that, start a terminal and then switch user to root. So once you have switched your user to root, just list all the disks that you have in your system. So you can see that we have /dev SDA, which is 20 GB in size. So this is the disk that we created when we were installing Linux, and you can see that we have all these partitions again which we created when we were installing Linux. So we are not going to touch that. Then we have another disk /dev sdb. This is the disk that we have just created now, which is 10 GB in size, and it is the one that we are going to format and copy our Oracle Grid software. Apart from that, we have two other disks, /dev sdc and /dev sdd. Now these two disks, we are going to put them in an ASM disk group. We are going to mirror them, and then we'll use it to install our Oracle database. Alright, so the first thing that we need to do then is to create a partition in this disk /dev sdb, and then mount it in /u02, and then once we have done that, we are going to install our Oracle Grid software in that location. Okay, so I'm just going to clear the screen. Then I'm going to use fdisk to create a partition on /dev sdb. Right now, when I say p, you can see that I don't have any partition. Okay, so I'm going to type n for new partition. Then I'm going to type p for creating a primary partition. You can see that for my primary partition, I can create only 1 to 4 partitions. So I'm going to create a primary partition. The first primary partition is 1. Then the first cylinder is 1. Let me just make it smaller so that you can see. Then the last cylinder, either here, if I was creating several partitions, I can say that the last cylinder is maybe plus 4 GB. Then it will have created a partition of 4 GB in size. But since I want to use the entire disk and create only one partition, I can just use the default, which is the last cylinder. So I just press enter. So when I type P now, you can see that I've created a partition /dev sdb1. So now I can just write the changes to my partition table by typing W for write. So now if I say fdisk /dev sdb1 sdb, and then I type P, you can see that it shows me my partition. So I'll just exit, clear the screen, and then create a file system. So once you've created the partition, next you need to create a file system. So I'll just say mkfs make file system .ext4 /dev sdb1. So this is going to create an ext4 file system on the partition that we have just created. So I press enter. You should be very careful with that command, because if you put here a wrong partition, it will delete all your data. So I clear. Now I need to mount that partition, but before I do that, I will need to create a mount point. So I want to mount it in U02, so I'll just create a folder mkdir /U02. So this is where I'm going to mount that partition that we have just created. Okay, but something else is that we need this partition to be owned by a user called OraGrid. So we have not yet created the user, but since we had already created the groups DBA and OInstall, we can just go ahead and create the OraGrid user. So we can just say user add -m -d. So -d there means you want to specify the home directory, which will be /home OraGrid, and then the user's primary group will be DBA, the user's secondary group will be OInstall, and then the user we are creating is OraGrid. Once you've created the OraGrid user, give it a password. Okay, so it has created the user and it has also updated the password. The reason why I'm creating the user is because once I mount this partition on this file system, I want that partition or that directory to be owned by the user or a grid. Okay, so now how do we mount this /dev sdb1 to u02? We want to make the changes permanent, so we are going to do that in this file. Let me just clear the screen. Then open the file etc fs tab or your file system table. You can see that this file, anything that begins with the hash is a comment, and then from here now it lists all your devices and their mount point. For example, this device here, the mount point is /. This device here, the mount point is /home. Remember, we had created this during installation of Linux. So all these we created during installation of Linux. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just copy this first entry, then I'll paste it down here and modify. So my device is called /dev sdb1. So /dev sdb1. I want to mount it on /u02. The file system will be ext4, and then these ones just leave them as the default. So save your file. So once you do that, then you can just say mount the mount point u02. Now if I say df-h, you can see that u02 have been mounted. So that's how you create a virtual disk in VirtualBox, and then you create a file system on it, and then you mount it on your system. Now the other thing that we need to do is that we want to change the ownership of this. If I go to cd/, let me clear the screen, then -l, you can see that u02 is owned by the user root and the group root. So I want to change the ownership so that it is owned by OraGrid and the group DBM. So I'll just change the owner in a recursive manner. So I want it to be owned by OraGrid and the group should be DBA, and then the file u02, the folder u02. So I'll clear the screen again. Now when I do my ls, you can see that u02 is owned by OraGrid and the group is DBA. So once we do that, we can now copy our OraGrid files from our system to this folder. So again, I'm going to use FileZilla as we had done previously. So I'll go to File, Site Manager. So this is the connection to my server, my virtual server. This is the IP address. I'm going to connect as the user OraGrid. The password is OraGrid. I'll connect. Then here, remote site, I'll change to u02. Then I'll just go to the location where I have my OraGrid software. Remember, we had downloaded this in our introduction to this course. We had downloaded it from Oracle website. So this is the software that we need to copy from our Windows system to our Linux system. So I'll just copy it across. So you can see it's transferring the file. So the transfer is complete. So now what we need to do, let me just clear the screen and then fdisk-l again. You see that we have created on /dev sdb, we have created a file system and also the partition. Now we have these two disks that are remaining, /dev sdc and /dev sdd. Remember these two disks, we want to create a partition but we don't want to put make a file system on that particular partition because we are going to use ASM on those disks. So this is how we proceed to prepare these two disks for use in an ASM disk group. So I'll just clear. So the first step is that we need to create a partition. So I'll do fdisk/dev sdc to create a partition. Let me make it smaller. So when I say P, you see that it doesn't have any partition. So again, I say N to create a new partition. Either I can create extended or primary partition, but I'm going to create a primary partition, so press P. So a primary partition can have from 1 to 4. So I'll use 1 for the first primary partition. So the first cylinder of this primary partition can be between 1 and 1305. So since I want to start at the beginning, I'll use 1. And then the last cylinder can be between 1 and 1305. And since I'm going to use the entire disk for this partition, I'll just go to the end of the cylinders. So I just press enter, or I can type 1305 because that is the default. So when I say P now, you see that I've created a partition /dev sdc1. Now I can write this to my partition table. So I'm done with /dev sdc. I'll clear the screen. Now I go fdisk/dev sdd to create a partition. Fdisk/dev sdd. Again, we create an when we type P to view partitions, we see that there is no partition. N to create a new partition. Create a primary partition, partition 1. First cylinder again is 1. And last cylinder is 1305. So just press enter. When you press P, you see that you've created a partition /dev sdd1. Then write the changes to your partition table. So we are done with creating the partitions. Now what I want to do is that since it's very difficult to work from this on this screen, I'm just going to connect using PuTTY. Okay, so I'll just connect using PuTTY as Aura Grid user. I clear the screen. Then I'll switch user to be root. So fdisk-l again. So you can see that /dev sdb has a partition, /dev sdc has a partition, /dev sdd has a partition. So now what we want to do is that /dev sdc and /dev sdd, we want to use them in ASM. So we have said that the first step is to create a partition in them, which we have done. And then number 2, we need now to check the unique ID of each of those disks. So we need to know the unique ID of /dev sdc and then the unique ID of /dev sdd. This is because we are going to use something called udev, and udev requires you to know the unique ID of the disks. Okay, so how do we tell the unique ID of /dev sdc? To get the unique ID of /dev sdc, use the command SCSI ID -g -u -d, then /dev sdc. So you press enter. Now this one is the unique ID of /dev sdc. I need to know the unique ID of /dev sdd. So I'll just clear the screen and then I use the same command, but now I'm going to say /dev sdd. So this is the unique ID of /dev sdd. So once you have your unique IDs, you need to make your SCSI devices to be trusted. So how do you do that? You create this file. If it doesn't exist, etc scsiid.config. Inside that file, you put this setting and then you save. Next, we need to create a udev rules file. So this is the location of the udev rules file. Okay, so create that file. So we will paste an entry for each disk. Now the first line, you can see that kernel is equals to SD question mark 1. So this question mark is a placeholder because we know that disks in Linux start with SD, then it can be SDA, SDB, SDC, like that. So this is a placeholder for that character, either A, B, C, D, like that. And then the bus type is SCSI program that we are going to use to get the unique ID, as we have seen is SCSI ID with these options. Then this is the most important one because this is the first unique ID for /dev SDC. So this is the first, this entry is for /dev SDC, and then this entry is for /dev SDD. So just replace here with your unique IDs. And then another important thing is that for the first disk, we are going to call it ASM-disk1. You can put any name you want here. And then the second disk, we are going to call it ASM-disk2. The owner of this disk will be OraGrid. Remember, we have created the user called OraGrid. And then the group will be DBA. And then the mode will be 660. So once you do that, save the file. So we'll clear the screen. Then let's load the updated block device partitions. So we just use the patprod command. So we have done that for /dev SDD1. Now we need to do for /dev SDC1. Lastly, we need to restart udev. So we're going to restart udev. Once that is done, let's go to /dev, see this /dev, and check if we have anything with the name ASM, because that's what we specified in our rules file. So ASM/. So you can see that we have these two disks, ASM disk 1 that is owned by OraGrid and the group is DBA, again owned by OraGrid, the group is DBA. So our system is now ready, all the disks are there, so we can go ahead and install the OraGrid. So I'll switch again back to the system. I'll close this terminal. So remember here we are logged in as a user Oracle, so I'll need to log out. And I need to log in as OraGrid because we are going to install the OraGrid software as user OraGrid. So open a terminal. Then cd/u02. Then now you need to unzip the grid software. So we'll unzip. So once we have unzipped the grid software, since we lack space, we can just now remove the zip file. Then cd to grid folder, and then now just execute the run installer as user OraGrid. So that's again is going to launch your Oracle Universal Installer. So you can either install and configure grid infrastructure for a cluster, or you can install and configure grid infrastructure for standalone server, or upgrade grid infrastructure, or install grid infrastructure software only. So let's do the second one, install and configure grid infrastructure for a standalone server. So click on next. So the language is English. Now this is the most important part, creating an ASM disk group. Okay. Now we will call our disk group data. The redundancy that we are going to use is normal, but let me discuss what each means. Okay. Let me just show you what each means. The redundancy levels, this is what they mean. If you select high redundancy, So it says that in a disk group created with high redundancy, the contents of the disk group are three-way mirrored. So this means that you need at least 3 disks, because it will be mirrored 3 times. So in every disk, it will contain a mirror of the other one. So this gives you a lot of protection, but you see that it wastes disks, because the effective disk space of a disk group that uses high redundancy is 1/3, simply because it's mirroring in every disk. So even if you had 3 disks of 1 TB each, the only capacity that you can use is not 3 TB but 1 TB, because of that three-way mirror. We have another one called normal. So in disk groups created with normal redundancy, the contents of the disk group are two-way mirrored. So this therefore means that you need at least 2 disks, so that one disk can be mirrored to the other one. So this one, the useful capacity is half, because if you have 2 disks and they are mirrored, it only means that you can use half the capacity. And then we have external. So if disks are created with an external, there is no mirror in external, you use the full capacity of your disk. So this one is important if you are using maybe a SAN that is already mirrored at the storage level, and you don't want to do mirroring at ASM level. Okay, so you see there they're saying the disk group contains devices such as RAID devices that provide their own data protection. So you don't need to again mirror at ASM level. Another thing is that maybe you just want to create a test server like we are doing, and you don't need any protection for your data. Okay, so what we are going to use is a normal mirroring, so which means we provide 2 disks and they'll be mirrored. Now the candidate disk that we can use here is that there's nothing. So what we need to do is change discovery path, and then remember the path was /dev and then *ASM*, because the name of our disk had the word ASM. So now we have 2 candidate disks, 10 GB each, /dev ASM disk 1 /dev ASM disk 2. So I'll select all of them. Okay, and then say next. Now I'm going to use the same password for all these accounts. So I'll just say Oracle, password Oracle. So this is a poor password, it will complain, but since it's a test, let's say next. Then we'll use the same group for all of them, DBA. So again it will complain, but you just say yes. Okay, so Oracle base is U02 app Oracle grid, and the software location again is the same. So say next. Inventory directory will be that, next. So now it's checking the packages. Remember in the previous lesson we had seen how to install these packages like libaio, compat, libsdt++, etc. Here it is saying they have failed, though the issue is not that we don't have these packages. The issue is that we have installed a higher version. So since we are sure they are there and we have installed them, we can just say ignore all. Okay. So apart from the packages, it's also complaining about swap size. We don't have enough swap size, so there's no issue. We can just ignore because it's a test server. But in a production server, make sure you have enough swap. So just say next. So it will give you a summary. So these are the global settings. This is the inventory information. And then lastly, you have your grid infrastructure settings. It is going to create an ASM disk group called data. Storage redundancy will be normal. And then the disk it's going to use is /dev ASM disk 1 and /dev ASM disk 2. Then click on finish. So that will take a few minutes to install. Once you have finished with the install, it will tell you to execute 2 configuration scripts. So the first one is U02 app or inventory or inst root.sh. Before running these 2 scripts, or inst root.sh and root.sh, there are some changes that we need to make because of incompatibility with our init startup procedures. which is new in Enterprise Linux 6. Alright, now there is a version of Oracle Grid software that is compatible with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6. So this is version 11.2.0.3. But remember, what we are installing is Enterprise, its Grid version 11.2.0.1. So our own is not compatible with the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6. So we need to make some changes. Now, if you go to this thread, they'll give you the steps that you need to make. Otherwise, your ASM will not start up correctly. Okay. So before we run those two scripts, what we need to do is we need to go to the grid home CRS install, and then we need to open this file. So we'll just do that. So I'm already there. I'll clear the screen. So this is the location that you need to go to. Then next, you need to open this file. So I'll just VI that file. And then I need to search for this. So to search, you just say / press enter. So what we need to do is that we need to paste what have been put there just under this line. So I'm going to copy all the way up to here, and then I paste it there. So once I've done that, I'll save the file, and then I need to create this file as a root user. And then inside that file, I need to paste these entries. So once I have finished that, now I can execute my root.sh. So remember, this is because of incompatibility issues with the way init have been done in Enterprise Linux 6. Alternatively, if you don't want to do that, you can upgrade your Oracle Grid software to 11.2.0.3. Alright, so I hope you go to this thread and learn why we are doing all that. Okay, so now we can go ahead and run our root.sh. So I'll copy that, go to a window where I'm logged in as root, and then I'll paste. Then again, I'll do the same for this. Update node list was successful. Once you've done that, click on OK, and the installation will continue. So it will tell you that installation of Oracle Grid infrastructure for standalone server was successful. So I'll just close that window. Now I'll open a terminal. So first I'm going to check if ASM instance is up. So I'll just say ps -ef, then I'll grep vmon. So you can see that we have ASM instance up and running.